Mindlock is a curious early access game that I'm surprised I enjoyed as much as I did. I first heard about it when the developer promoted it in one of the Discord servers I'm in. To quote him directly, "I made a dumb game where you craft tons of spells to fight demon houseware, inspiration from Dark Souls and Kingdom Hearts." This was enough to pique my interest, and after viewing the store page, I wasn't sure if this game was even for me. I've never been a fan of Metroidvanias or 2D platformers. I bought Hollow Knight and Dead Cells to get a better comparison for that genre, and while I've been enjoying Hollow Knight, I refunded Dead Cells after 16 minutes of playtime. This isn't a genre that has ever really appealed to me, and yet I love Mindlock. What I can say is that comparing this game to Dark Souls or Kingdom Hearts is doing it a great disservice, because even if the game was inspired by either of these two games, there are very few parallels you can draw between them. I'd go as far as to say that this game is much more relaxing to play than anything else, but not so laid back that it makes the combat feel unengaging. So what is Mindlock? The answer is simple. Mindlock is about crafting spells to kill enemies, gathering their resources, and then crafting stronger spells if what you have isn't working. This is a bit of an oversimplification, but it's what you'll be doing for the majority of the game's runtime, which as of now is only about 2 hours. As I mentioned a moment ago, the game is still in early access, although I'd go as far as to say it's in early access, since only one level is available, and yet the foundation here is, simply put, amazing. That's not to say that the game is perfect, there are many issues with it, but the core concepts are sound, and judging by the rough outline left on the Steam page, the developer is very aware of the current state of the game and is working to improve things going forward. So that's where this video comes in. I like this game, I support its core concepts and mechanics, and I want to offer constructive feedback about the game while hopefully getting a few more people on board in the process. However, I'd like to establish some ground rules before we start. First, I will not be treating this game any differently than anything else I've critiqued just because it's in early access. That's not to say that I'm going to judge it as I would a fully priced AAA release, but I won't be deflecting or ignoring criticism under the assumption that it'll be addressed in the future. With that being said, let's get into it. I would best describe Mindlock as a roguelike Metroidvania that is unlike anything I've really seen. I'm sure there are some comparisons out there to be made, but I haven't played enough roguelikes or Metroidvanias to say for sure. What I can say, with what content the game has today, is that Mindlock's focus is almost entirely about its spellcrafting system. The platforming, while present, is clearly not the game's main focus. Your only real movement options for platforming are hovering, which is something you can do briefly by holding down the jump button in midair, and performing a dash at the peak of your jump, otherwise you lose all momentum in the process. You can combine the two and perform a hover dash, which is likely the most effective way to handle the platforming sections. I don't know if this is something that will be expanded on in the future, but I don't think adding hazards to be avoided during platforming will work like it does in Hollow Knight because of the approach to level design, which we'll get into later. Even the game's combat, while engaging and enjoyable, feels like an excuse to get you back into the spellcrafting menu to experiment. You can hold up to 4 spells, you can charge a spell to make it more powerful, your dash acts as a dodge, and you have a shield that can currently be spammed to avoid all damage, although doing this takes more dedication than some other options available to you. Combat can be described as simply as identifying when an enemy is about to attack, dodging out of the way or activating your shield, and then hitting them with spells until they're dead. On paper, this sounds incredibly basic, but in practice, it works out surprisingly well, thanks in large part to the game's spellcrafting system and the level design. Let's start with that first one. You craft spells at the Pillow Fort, which is this game's checkpoint system similar to a bench in Hollow Knight or a bonfire in Dark Souls. The spell system looks confusing at first, but it's actually very simple once you understand it. Spells cost dust and gems to craft. The gems are what power the spell, and it costs 10 dust per gem. You acquire both of these resources from killing enemies and destroying the large crystals scattered around the level, and you'll end up with far more gems than you could possibly use over the course of the first few hours. There are 4 gem slots while crafting: Prime, Shape, Alt, and Mod. The mod slot is still in development, so it doesn't do anything right now. Each slot can only hold one type of gem, but you can increase the quantity of that gem in that slot. I feel like this is really confusing, so let me walk you through the process. The prime slot is the primary damage type that your spell will be doing. There are 12 different types of gems in this game, each of which make up their own element. Additionally, each gem will give the spell a different shape, which brings us to the second slot. Each shape is unique and can suit their own purposes. For example, some projectiles can move down slopes easier than others, which would help if you wanted to get some quick damage on an enemy you can't see yet. There is a little bit of awkwardness when it comes to fighting enemies on slope surfaces because you can end up casting the spell above or below them, so the solution would be to craft a spell that works better for that area. Spells can be easily swapped from your inventory, so the only hassle is trying to find the one you want to use. Not all spell shapes are equal in effectiveness though. For example, the Chaos shape causes the spell to pour onto enemies, although it's impossible to judge the range of this spell, so you might miss them entirely. The Glow shape functions in a similar way and thus has the same issue. A simple solution would be showing a shadow of the spell while charging it so you know where it's going to land and can judge accordingly. Another fix would be increasing the duration of the spell and turning them into traps that you lure enemies into to damage them. If the AI gets upgraded in the future and they can detect these spells and avoid them, then this could be used to drop into large groups and add some strategy to the field where you cut off tougher enemies while you deal with the weaker ones. Although this would still have the problem of not knowing where they're going to be placed, so maybe solution isn't the right word for these suggestions. It also seems like some enemies are stronger against certain shapes than others, like light bulbs being weak to the rain gem's AoE shape while toasters don't appear to take as much damage from it. This is probably a good thing so that AoEs don't become the clear meta like they do in other games that feature spellcrafting. Still, this makes it seem like the shape of your spell is more impactful than the damage type, which might be the intention for reasons we'll get into in a moment. To finish up the crafting walkthrough, the alt slot is just an alternate damage type so you can further specialize your spells against certain enemies, and I assume in the future, bosses. So, to summarize, there are 12 different elements to base your spells on, 12 different shapes that these can take regardless of their damage type, and further modifications coming in the future that will change up your spells in other ways. Even without the modifications, the system has the potential of 144 spell combinations if we ignore the alternate damage types. But by doing so, we would also be ignoring the second types of spells in this game, harmony spells. These are created by placing two opposing elements in the prime and alt slots, and if you can't tell which ones are opposites, don't worry. Just pick a random row on the list and combine the gems from either column 1 and 2, or 3 and 4, and watch the magic happen. Literally. Harmony spells have different effects than offensive ones, with most of them being defensive buffs. There's one strong exception, which is the Logic and Chaos Gem Harmony spell, which makes damaging orbs rain from the sky that can nuke enemies untouched, at least on level 1. I almost missed this spell, and I only found it when I decided to try out all the Harmony spells, which there are 6 of. This is the only one that does something crazy like this, but it shows how much potential the system could have if more combinations of gems had a greater impact than just shape and damage type. I believe this is what the mod slot would seek to accomplish, although I can't say for sure. I'm fairly certain that there will be more unique spells and spell combinations in the future, but I still feel the need to point out that this system, while good, has a mountain of potential that could make it stand out even more than it currently does. Let's move on from spells and talk about the other thing I mentioned, level design. This is also going to touch on exploration and progression, since the levels are actually part of the progression. There's only one level right now, but if all of them follow a similar structure, then I can say I'll end up enjoying future levels just as much. You start at the top of the level and slowly work your way down to the bottom where you'll fight a boss. The game takes place in what appears to be a dream world or imagination land, so this has the potential to make each level crazier as you descend further into the recesses of your mind, or something like that. I imagine from what I've seen that this is already the intention, but if not, I think it would be really cool to see. As you make your way down the level, you are actively searching for horizontal paths that contain extra items and sometimes offer branching paths that will take you to other parts of the level disconnected from the main path. Although main path implies that where you're supposed to go is clearly signposted, which it isn't. This is what makes exploring the levels interesting. You're stumbling upon different charms that can be slotted at the Pillow Fort, which I imagine was inspired by Hollow Knight since it worked the same way in that game. There are only a couple of interesting charms right now, one of which comes after defeating the boss, but let's shelf that discussion for the moment and get back to exploration. As you explore, you will inevitably come across a giant crystal of a certain color that may or may not be affected by your spells. These are the elemental barriers, and they serve as non-linear progression paths that will sometimes lead to more unique charms. It actually took me a while to figure out how to deal with these, despite them being listed both on the Steam page and in the notes section of the menu. The answer is to return to your Pillow Fort, craft a spell with the appropriate gem in one of the slots, and go back to destroy the barrier. All of them are color-coded in a way that allows you to easily identify what gem they require, and some of them even have a visual effect representing their spell shape, which is useful for determining the difference between glow and chaos barriers since they're basically the same color. From what I've tested, I don't think it matters which slot the correct gem is in for the spell to work on the barrier as long as that gem is slotted. But there is at least one illusion barrier that I could never break through. No combination of illusion gems, not even all 3 of them slotted at once, would work on it. Other than that, I like the elemental barriers because they force you to test different combinations of gems even if you haven't already. You might ignore the single target gems in favor of something that can hit multiples at once like Ember, but then be forced to try something new when you hit a barrier. Maybe you'll just switch out the alternate damage type to get past it, or maybe you'll try something radically different, but it pushes you back into the spellcrafting menu regardless. I hope you're starting to see why I said the entire game revolves around this system, and I'm glad that it does. There are other aspects of the level design that I like, and they feed into the non-linear feel of it. Since everything is moving downwards, you can often find these small geysers that can boost you to a higher part so you can continue exploring. If you do reach the bottom of a progression path, you'll usually find another elemental barrier leading to a tough encounter that will shower you in gems if completed, and then a teleporter that will take you back to one of the pillow forts. There are only 3 of them in this level, one at the beginning, one somewhere in the middle, and one after completing the boss. A teleporter will open at the beginning of the level to return to one of these, although the one after the boss is absent. This is likely because there's nothing to really do down there, but this could also be a bug, I'm not sure. The middle pillow fort doesn't teleport you back to the top of the level, it teleports you one floor at a time until eventually putting you back at the top. This may seem excessive, but these teleports are quick and you don't need to go through many to reach the top. I'm actually not opposed to this mechanic because one of the areas it puts you in contains a really good charm. For future levels, I would take this one step further and make it to where some areas can only be reached via teleporter. So you explore these sprawling non-linear levels, activate a hidden teleporter, then find yourself in another area that offers more to explore and maybe some secret items to reward you for being thorough. Some of these could offer a unique challenge not seen in the rest of the level, or could contain another pillow fort that offers a shorter path to the boss. And this brings us to the potential that this style of level design has. I'm not going to say that these levels are easier to design than anything else in your usual Metroidvania, but the descending platform design must be easier to construct on a large scale than the interconnected areas you can find in Hollow Knight, if nothing else because it doesn't need to connect to a larger world. This may seem less interesting to some people, but I find the concept appealing. Regardless of where you are, you know that going down is always the correct path, and the only thing you need to be concerned with is not missing the secrets along the way. The lack of an in-game map also adds to this, and even after 4 hours in this first level, I still can't say that my mental map is entirely accurate. There is a mechanic that's meant to prevent you from getting lost by cropping up pink flora where you step, but these markers are a little too spaced out for me to reliably track as I make my way through. Over time, I forgot they were even there. I think if every platform was barren as they are now and started growing grass and changing color after you've stepped on them, then this mechanic would be much more reliable. This would also make the visuals more interesting on a broader scale as the world is responding to the areas you visited. As it is, these little patches of pink flora feel too minimalistic to have a strong effect. The last thing I have to discuss before getting into the game's various problems are the charms. The charms right now are really basic, with the only interesting ones, ironically, being the most overpowered. A majority of charms are simple: more stamina, more health, more strength, etc. The few notable exceptions that I found are the movement speed charm that absolutely breaks the game's platforming, and the penguin charm after defeating the boss that makes your spells 5 times stronger and drastically decreases spell cooldowns but nerfs your movement speed, which of course means that I combined the two and got to play around as this cute little guy for a while. It's a shame that there isn't a lot you can do with this once you get it, and since charms and checkpoints currently don't persist after quitting the game, it means you can't use it against the boss. The penguin charm is what made me realize how these could fundamentally change the way the game is played, and entire builds could be made around this system. Imagine for a moment that there are multiple charms like this in the game that change your stats. The penguin charm makes you slower but deals more damage, and you can alleviate the slow movement speed with another charm, effectively taking 2 out of 3 of your charm slots. I can see this also being a reward for exploring the levels thoroughly. You get the penguin charm after beating the first boss as a way of introducing the concept, and then you're pushed to explore the levels and find more of them. Some of them can be tied to secret challenge areas that are accessed by finding secret teleporters around the levels, and each special charm like this would change your character's stats but have their own significant drawback. The penguin nerfs your movement speed. Let's say there's a cat charm that increases your speed and jumping height but nerfs your strength and stamina. Another one could be an armadillo that increases defense but lowers dodge distance, an eagle with increased hover distance and a double jump, things like that. These aren't great ideas, but I think you can see how things like this could work. Maybe make the buffs equivalent of 2 or 3 of that charm, so the increases don't seem like they can be achieved without the drawbacks. I also think your dodge animation should be changed to reflect your form, if nothing else for the aesthetic. The penguin could have a belly slide as a dodge that still offers iframes when activated, but is much slower than the phase shift seen with the default. The cat could have a sprint that achieves the same thing, and the armadillo could have a roll. These are minor changes, but would make these different forms much more charming. I think this would add another layer to the game that would help it stand out even more than it would with the spell system alone. Some of the default charms would need to be nerfed in order to achieve this. The movement speed charm already makes you extremely fast without the penguin charm lowering your movement speed, so having a cat charm that increases movement speed might seem redundant when you already move like this, which is why I think packaging multiple buffs like increased movement speed and jump height and distance would make it more appealing. These charms would also fit certain themes. The cat would obviously be for platforming and maneuvering, the penguin is for pure DPS, and the armadillo is for players who have a hard time with the bosses. A lot of these suggestions are going to require some serious balancing to the game, which as of now isn't really the case. Why increase your defense when you can spam shield and evasion spells? This isn't a problem that the developer isn't aware of. I've spoken with him on Discord in the past and he is very aware that the game isn't very balanced right now. But like I mentioned before, I still want to raise this point in the video. There would also be a problem with levels having to be designed around the idea of players using or ignoring these special charms, so they couldn't capitalize on the advantages they bring. Why have a double jump or increased jump distance when it isn't required? These are issues I don't have clear answers for, short of making some areas more accessible with these bonuses that can still be reached by finding another way around. So you feel that they're still helping you out. I'm sure there's a balance to be struck, but I alone can't think of a clear solution to the problem that doesn't result in an arduous amount of work that might take away from other systems that could greatly benefit from it. Still, I think these concepts show how the charms could be used for more than just passive bonuses. This brings us to the next topic, the game's issues. I'd like to say up front that I'm pretty sure the developer is aware of many of the smaller issues. There's a notes section in the game's pause menu that says that they're aware that many features are missing, the AI isn't very smart right now, and that collision is a little wonky. Despite this, I'll be laying out these problems anyways. Most of these issues aren't game-breaking, but at least one of them is. Let's start with the most apparent problem for most people who purchased this game on Steam, the game's controls. There's a disclaimer at the bottom of the main menu screen that says that this game was designed to be played with a controller, and it shows in the mouse and keyboard controls. I prefer playing games on mouse and keyboard these days, but this felt very awkward for Mindlock. In defense of this game, Hollow Knight's default keyboard controls were also counterintuitive, but in that game you're allowed to rebind these keys, whereas you can't do that in Mindlock. I don't know if this is a feature that's currently being worked on, but if not, then I think it would be worth the effort. I'm showing the control schemes on screen now, and as you can see, they are much more intuitive on controller than they are mouse and keyboard. I had access to my PS4 controller so I could use it to play the game, but this alone makes it hard for me to recommend to anybody who doesn't, which is a real shame considering how much I think it's worth your time. Just by taking a look at the keybinds, you can see the issue. There are 3 dodge buttons, right click, left shift, or S. You can left click to cast spell number 1, but the usual controls are delegated to the awkward diagonal keys of H, J, N, and M. The alternate keys are just as bad, requiring K, L, comma, and period. This isn't a comfortable way for you to hold your hand while playing, and I think this can be done much better. Ideally, you should be able to rebind these keys to whatever you want, but if this isn't something that can be done right now, I think the game should commit to delegating the mouse for menu screens and only setting the game to be played solely on keyboard. This isn't something that would please everybody, myself included, but I don't see how you could fit 4 spells on a regular mouse without access to the scroll wheel, which would still make it awkward to scroll through. Here are a couple schemes I can see working. Make WASD the movement. I think dodging, jumping, and shield bindings are alright, but change the spells to be accessed from the arrow keys. This way you can keep both hands on the keyboard and have access to your full arsenal. The alternate method, which you should be allowed to select in the menu, would be the opposite of this. You can move with the arrow keys, but control your spells with WASD, and everything else is the same. Another option, which I would personally use, would be binding the spells to the number keys. I would use the ones in the number pad, but people familiar with MMO hotbar combat might be more comfortable using the regular number keys and moving with the arrows. This binding would also make pressing down to dodge more prominent, as you probably won't be able to reach the shift key with your hands on the number keys. Like I said, you should ideally be able to change these bindings to whatever is comfortable for you, but I think these choices would be the best. If for another reason multiple binding choices can't be offered in-game, which I could understand being the case if you can't already switch your bindings, then something as simple as rebinding your spells to the arrow keys would still work, since moving with them in the current scheme feels even worse than just using WASD. I can't speak for everybody, but this would be much more comfortable for me personally. Moving past controls, let's talk about the one game-breaking bug in this game. If you back out of the spell menu after crafting a spell, but before you wait for the confirmation screen, then it will cause the menu to persist until you restart the game. You can still walk around and fight things, but you won't be able to access your inventory or anything in the pillow fort. I have brought this up to the dev directly, so this is an issue he is 100% aware of. I suggested in that conversation that disabling your ability to back out during the confirmation screen or removing that screen altogether in favor of a message on the top of your screen like those seen when collecting dusted gems would fix this issue, because it's only during the slow transition to the confirmation screen that this can happen. The spell still gets crafted regardless, so the confirmation itself isn't important. I think this would also cut down on the amount of time you spend in this menu, since I would often craft a spell and back out immediately to save time, which is how I discovered the bug. If you do find yourself quitting the game to fix this issue, then you'll notice that charms and checkpoints don't persist after a restart. I think this might be an intentional choice so you can reset the level and keep playing, but it's strange because your spells and upgrades do persist after restarting, yet these don't. I think that your charms should remain in your inventory after quitting so I can get more time messing around with the penguin, but checkpoints I can understand. They're not that difficult to reach, so that one doesn't bother me too much. The Firestorm Harmony spell has an issue where it drops the projectiles on the platform one floor above where you're standing. I think this has to do with your field of view not lining up with what the game considers to be the top of your screen, so it drops it too high instead. If this can be synced up properly, then this spell would be a lot more fun to mess around with, but I usually ended up nuking unsuspecting enemies who I couldn't see. Also, the Joy and Malice Harmony spell currently only heals you for 1 HP, regardless of the strength of the spell. There's also the issue of Harmony spells flat out not working if they're crafted with the gems in the wrong order. Putting Glow in the Prime slot and Shade in the Alt slot will create the spell properly, but reversing these two creates an offensive spell instead. I believe this might be because the game is programmed to read that specific formula of gems to create the Harmony spell instead of reading the combination of them. I'm not a programmer, but I think adding a template to the spell formula that recognizes the second gem order as a Harmony spell seems like an easy way to fix the problem, and this is an opportunity to make it a different type of Harmony spell since the primary element is different. Maybe have a system where the positive elements, that being joy, glow, logic, truth, etc., will create defensive spells, while having the negative elements like shade, chaos, illusion, and such would create something closer to the chaos firestorm I mentioned before. This would bump up the number of Harmony spells from 6 to 12 and add even more depth to the system. Speaking of spells, the inventory screen in this game is honestly a pain to deal with. You can recycle old spells into dust if you want to, but I already have so many spells in my menu that I find it difficult to locate the ones I'm searching for. This really needs a filter or sorting system that allows you to create various folders that you can place the spells in and then collapse to make going through the screen much easier. I think allowing the player to nickname their spells within this menu would also be helpful, so you don't need to look at the order of your gems to try and decide which one it is. This would also have been especially helpful for me since I have far more experimental offensive spells than I do the few Harmony spells that I actually use. It's important to handle this problem early before the inventory management becomes a major drawback to the game as more levels and spells are introduced. Likewise, I think there is a lot of visual clutter when collecting a lot of gems and dust at once. Hollow Knight handled this issue very well by counting the exact quantity of geode you had, so you don't have an entire screen of +1 filling up on the side. Even in Empyrean, which is another game made in the Unity engine that I've been meaning to cover on the channel for a while, has the quantity of items you collect stack as you collect them, so hopefully in time Mindlock can achieve the same. There's a random invisible platform somewhere past the first checkpoint. This may not actually be a bug judging by how much flora grows when you step on it, but it still threw me off every time I played. Enemies can also attack after dying. This can best be seen when fighting staple removers since they can hit you as they're flying away. For some reason the AI doesn't go passive after they're dead. Lastly, I think the level's boss is a bit underwhelming. The T-posing sisters are most of the challenge, and once they're dead, the boss itself takes too long to defeat. Again, I'm aware that this isn't how this boss is going to play in the full release of the game, but again it needs to be said, if nothing else because it will be an interesting comparison to make when this is changed. And that just about wraps up the issues I found with Mindlock. Admittedly, this isn't as bad as some other games that I played, but I do think they would be if this was the full release. Being able to acknowledge that these issues exist because the game is still in development does make things easier to accept, but these absolutely need to be addressed regardless. This is where the game benefits from being in early access since I can point these things out and hopefully see some improvements in the future. So this brings us to the end of this short video. I really like this game, and hopefully I've managed to convince at least one person watching to give it a try. It's not an oppressive or soul-crushingly difficult game, and I think that was the right decision. A large amount of the appeal for me is this game's charm, and I think losing that would have made the experience a lot less enjoyable. The calm music that plays in the background really adds to the experience, and I've come to realize that this game doesn't take itself too seriously. This is good because I feel a lot would have been lost if it did. I put 4 hours into this first level so far, and I can definitely recommend this game to anybody with a controller, although my mouse and keyboard brothers might have a little bit of trouble. Still, if you're willing to look past that, you'll find that Mindlock is a very enjoyable experience, and more content will be coming in the future. I won't be making a new video every time a level drops, but I will be taking notes on the changes made and revisiting the game after its full release. So you guys are probably really surprised to see me release a new video so shortly after the last one. Well, as it happens, I just started my summer semester of college, and I start a new full-time job on Monday, so this is my last video as a free man, so to speak. I also intend on taking at least 4 classes this upcoming fall and spring semester in addition to working the job, so as you can imagine, I'm going to have drastically less free time to make these videos. Despite all that, I am going to make the videos, because I will inevitably have free time to sit around and play video games, which means I will have free time to sit around and talk about video games. Regardless, I am thankful for you guys for continuing to watch these videos, and I will try to have at least one out per month, but I do ask for a little bit of patience if I can't make it happen. Whenever it comes to entire franchise critiques, I may actually need to split those into one video per game, or if they're short, 1 or 2 videos per game. For example, I do intend on doing a video on the Mass Effect trilogy one of these days, so that may actually be 3 videos instead of 1. With my obligatory disclaimer / explanation out of the way, I appreciate you guys for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.